So it's 1 minute past, so I think we'll make a start and say it's lovely to have you all here. We are Places of Welcome, myself and Annika. We support Places of Welcome, which started in Birmingham in around the year 2014, I think it was. And we've now grown to 600 Places of Welcome, more than that, across England. We are in libraries and community centres, as well as places of worship. And we've just had this week join us a football club and a theatre. So we're very varied, and each place of welcome looks very different. But what we do is we're able to provide a warm and welcoming space to people every week of the year who want to connect, belong, and contribute. And for those of you who might be new to Places of Welcome, what's really important is our ethos, our 5 Ps, which are about presence and participation and people. And one of the important and essential parts of Places of Welcome is that people are present to one another. So when people come, they don't just come in, sit down, have a cup of tea, read a leaflet and leave. But people have relationships with one another. People engage with one another. People listen. People understand. And to that in note, that's why we've asked Linking Lives to come along today, because Linking Lives is a charity which for quite a number of years has been doing training and sharing really good practice on how we listen really well to one another. And so I'm going to just introduce Angela and David to you, who are from Linking Lives, and they've kindly come along today to tell you more about what they do and the training that they do. So I'm going to be handing over to David particularly, who's going to be the main speaker, and he'll be presenting to you for about 40 minutes or so. And then at the end, we're going to have about 1:45, we're going to have some discussion ourselves about our own Places of Welcome, how it's going, what's happening, what support we might need, what's a barrier, what's really positive. And then we'll have some Q&A, so you can ask questions and you can put them in the chat if you don't want to speak them out loud. So if you've just joined us, please put where you are from and perhaps something about your place of welcome in the chat. That'd be lovely to know who you are and where you're from. Welcome. Right, so without any further ado, I'm handing over to you, David.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Liz. That's great. I'm David Delahaye. I'm the Training and Resources Manager for Linking Lives, and I'm actually based down in the southwest in Devon. We're actually spread all over the country. We're a small team running a countrywide charity, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Angela is over in Norfolk, so that just gives you some idea of the spread. And so we're really grateful for this opportunity to share with you something about a product, a service that we call our Good Conversations training. This is something that has grown up recently, so I'd like to tell you a bit about it and give you an opportunity to make an assessment of whether you think it might be useful for you or your people, and if so, how to access it, etc. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you should be seeing my title slide. Thumbs up from a few people. See my title slide? Excellent. Thank you very much. Right. So what we're going to cover in the next 40 minutes or so is what the training is for, what it's aimed at, the purpose behind it, if you like, what it actually covers, sort of look at the main topics of coverage. We'll talk about how to access it and the various modes of delivery, how that might work for you, and we'll also mention a few of the upcoming events that we've got going, and there'll be a few bits in between those things as well, but those are the main points of what I'm going to cover in the next little while. So I'll start off, I suppose, with kind of preaching to the choir in a sense, because if you're here, then you're probably already involved in having, in hosting people, having guests come in and have conversations with you. But I think it's worth just reminding ourselves why it is that it's so important that we have these things that we call good conversations with a capital G and a C. Um, I know Places of Welcome has been going for a number of years, but in fact, in sort of the latter part of last year, um, there was a huge upwelling of places opening up to provide warm space, more so than there perhaps had been in previous years. And that was with the looming of a cold winter and a cost of living crisis. And so the main kind of thrust behind these places opening up was very often about helping with the cost of living. We've been quite associated with the Warm Welcome campaign, which is another organisation doing something a little bit similar, and certainly they, when they opened up and got going, they were aimed mainly at the cost of living crisis, whether people could afford to heat their homes, whether they were getting food during the day and so forth. But when they surveyed the people that were coming in, they actually found, to their surprise, that people were coming in order to have a conversation, probably more important to them than actually the practicalities. So I'm putting the word loneliness in here, not to create something which is about doing something to people or for people. It's not about that. It's not about something that we're trying to if you like, stigmatize in any way. The point is that loneliness is an epidemic in this country, and it's a very hazardous one. It's hazardous to health, and it is important that people are doing something about that. So the reason why we need these good conversations in particular is that we all need to engage in this social interaction, but we have a lot of social interaction in our lives. Most of us do, almost everybody, but a lot of it is functional. There's some business to do, whether it's in shops or whether it's people coming to our homes. There's a piece of business to do, and the chit chat seems like a bit of a waste of time and a bit of an extra. But we need the non-functional interactions as well. We need to feel valued for our own sake, and we need to feel that we relate to somebody and that they relate to us. And this is really important for our mental well-being. And in fact, there's quite strong evidence that even as little as half an hour to an hour of valuing social interaction with somebody on a weekly basis can just put hope into somebody's life who is perhaps struggling with that. And therefore, that's why we talk about the fact that it helps to prevent loneliness. That's important for us to know that are involved in delivering, but I think it's it's not something that we talk necessarily to the guest about. So, who are Linking Lives? Just a little bit of background. We are a registered national UK charity. We exist to address loneliness in the UK, which is why we talk about it. We have over 20 years experience of that type of activity. We do several things. One is to inspire individuals and volunteers, as well as churches and organisations, to take action. So we would hope to be inspirational. But we also provide practical resources for individuals, volunteers, churches, and other organisations. And we do that in a number of areas, which I'll describe in a little bit more detail slightly later on. But as we sort of getting started, I want to do something with you which is just a little bit of fun, not too onerous. But this illustrates that the fact that the training that we deliver, we try to make it as engaging and even a little bit fun as well, if we can, because we feel that helps people to engage more and to enjoy it more. And not to drift away and start looking out the window and so forth. So this just gives you an illustration of the kind of things that are included in the training. So I'm going to put a diagram up on the screen and ask you, how many squares do you see? How many squares do you see? And when you've counted squares, I'd like to ask you to just pop a number in the chat. We'll just see what kind of numbers start coming through. And this will be interesting to see. Let me just open up my the chat and see if I can have a look myself at what's coming through. 21, 25, 30, 26. Okay, differing opinions. Interesting. 21, 29. 34. Interesting. Okay, cool. Thank you very much for participating in that. Yeah, let's run through and just see what the official answer is, and then we'll talk about why that differs and why we get such different results, because we do get a lot of different results. There's obviously the 16 that we see there, which is a quarter of a chessboard, and that's pretty straightforward. But there's also, when you put 4 squares together, you get another square. So I put a line around one of the extra squares that we get. So there's one there, so that makes 17 now. So another one at the bottom, another one on the other side, and another one at the top. So that would make 20. But of course, those overlap as well. So there's actually one in the middle at the top, the middle at the bottom, the middle on the left, and the middle on the right. And then the one that sometimes catches people out, there's one right in the middle. But of course, you can't only make 4s, you can also make 9s. So there's a 9 there, and a 9 there, and a 9 there, and a 9 there. And then another one that people tend to overlook is the one right round the outside. So in fact, the correct answer is 30. You could make an argument for none, because actually it's little dots on your screen, and those aren't squares. They're probably rectangles. Or you could make an argument for an infinite number, because the screen is constantly being refreshed at 60 frames a second, and therefore you're seeing the same ones over and over and over again. And I didn't give you any rules as to say what you should or shouldn't include. I didn't give you any rules as to whether overlapping squares counted, whether you could count the same square twice if you added it in its own right, but added it as part of another square. I gave you no such rules. And so it was for you to make up your own rules and your own judgment about how you were going to assess the question that I asked. And you put your own interpretation on that question, which is interesting because we do that in conversation as well. We use our own experience and our own judgment to assess what we're hearing from people. So when somebody is talking to us and telling us about their life, the things that are going on in their life, we tend to filter it through the lens of our own experience and the way our own life is, probably at the moment, or at least maybe historically as well. And that means it's easy to overlook things which people say and discount them as not being so important. And whilst they might not seem important to us, they could be very important to the other person. So it's one of the things we talk about in the training is how to kind of open our minds up to try and see the world from the point of view of our guest, so that we can hear what is important to them in the conversation and not filter it through our perceptions. So as I say, a bit of fun, but it makes a serious point, I hope. So what sort of things do we have in these good conversations training sessions? The main topics that we talk about are understanding the guest's needs. So that starts with that open-minded listening. Active listening skills. So it would be easy for me to put together a 2-day training course on active listening. If you've been involved in counselling or a number of other types of activities, you may even done a 1-day or 2-day course on active listening. It's a big topic. So what we do is we cover it with some tips and techniques, some quick wins, if you like, of things that we can do to improve our listening and make it more active. We look at understanding body language, and body language is something that we may or may not have heard of. We may have heard of it in business contexts and things and think it doesn't apply here. It can be extremely valuable. It has aspects which most of us have probably heard about, but also has some aspects which people find surprising. So I hope there's a few surprises in there and people seem to find that useful. We also talk about making beneficial conversations. So how can we make our conversations more beneficial? Well, it's kind of all about that, but then we look really at the specifics and the practicalities of making a beneficial conversation and keeping it flowing. And that really revolves around asking the right questions, as well as the listening that we do. We also talk about maintaining boundaries, and that's really about this idea of keeping everybody safe. Whilst we don't necessarily consider what we're doing to be a hazardous occupation, by putting ourselves, if you like, in the public eye to some extent, by welcoming guests in and being there in that space, we expose ourselves to just a tiny little bit more risk. And so we need to look after ourselves, but we also, of course, represent a risk to our guests. And so we need to make sure we understand what those risks are and mitigate them as fully as possible. So we talk about that as well. So to give you a little bit of an illustration of that, I just want to dig a little bit deeper into that area of boundaries. I've been asked this afternoon to look in more depth at one of the topics, and this is the one that I've chosen to look at. So I'm just going to do a little excerpt, if you like, from the training itself, in which we look at the area of boundaries, just as briefly. So this is really in the area of taking care of yourself. At this point in the training, we've already talked about how we ensure that we take care of and preserve the well-being of the guest. And so now we're talking about ourselves. And I start off by explaining how boundaries are important, and that in fact what we're talking about is in terms of our own and their space. And so I explained the fact that we each have a space. Our space is kind of our life. It's who we are. It's the core of our personality, if you like, is our space. It's all the people we know, the things that we know, what's going on in our life. Some of that's quite private, some of it's quite public. So everything that about us is our space, and our guest coming in has a space. And so it's really important that we respect that. When they come in, we realize that that is their space. The fact that we are hosting them doesn't give us any rights over their space. They have to volunteer information willingly. But we also have a space. And our space is our private life outside of the volunteering work that we're doing. And it's really important that we protect that space. And we can do that in a couple of ways. But what we have to do is manage the shared space. So in that space where we overlap for a short period of time, it might be as little as a 5-minute conversation over giving out a library book or a food parcel. It might be as long as half an hour or an hour if somebody wants to stay and have a really long chat. But in that shared space where we overlap for a period of time, it's our job, our responsibility as the host of that shared space to manage the boundaries within that space. And we do that from our own point of view by keeping to our roles. So it's important that we're clear about what our role is as a volunteer, what we're there to achieve and do and not do, and then managing expectations of the guest. And some guests will come with no expectations, some will come with more expectations than are reasonable. And we need to know how to manage those things. That's not going to happen all the time. A lot of the time it will be really easy and there won't be any complications. But sometimes complications arise and it's important to know how to handle them. And of course, we will always be balancing this slightly interesting balancing act between confidentiality, which our guest has every right to expect, and balancing that with duty of care, which is implied by our volunteering role, where if we think there is something of concern, we may need to balance that against the confidentiality issue. And I'm sure in your different spaces and places where you volunteer, you will have policies about those things. In one or two instances, it's possible you might not have a policy about it, and therefore it might be worth thinking about. So I raise questions like that in the training, and I have had feedback from organisers to say, that they've gone away from the session and had a little bit of a rethink about how they equip their volunteers, handbooks, policies, things like that. So hopefully that's helpful. From that slide, I then go on to talk about that as a boundaries exercise. So I will then ask people to think about their own space. I'll ask them to think about what their role is. I'll ask them to talk about what spaces or think about what parts of their space they want to keep to themselves, so they can be intentional about that and prepared for questions that overstep the boundaries, and what to do then if those boundaries are challenged. And if it's a bespoke group for a group of people who are all working in the same environment, we'll do that as a discussion. For most of our open sessions, which I'll talk more about a little in a few minutes, in those open sessions, I would do that as I would talk about that as a set of questions they need to answer, and then I provide a document which asks those questions, which they can go away and work on. And I encourage participants to take that away and either on their own or with their colleagues in the team to work on answering some of those questions so that they are prepared. And then I go on to talk about managing expectations. So I would talk about what kind of expectations their guests might have, the reasonable ones and the unreasonable ones, what kind of responses they might be able to use, maybe some stock responses, but also some more thought through ones, maybe slightly more complex ones. And then we have a look at some potential scenarios, and I pose some scenarios of what might happen in a space where a guest is coming in, and we talk about how we might deal with them. So that's a segment of the training on that particular issue. So I hope that gives you some kind of taste of how the session runs. So back to the taster, what we were talking about. So I kind of stepped out into the session itself there. I'll step back into the overview. So we have a number of different modes of delivery of this training. I've mentioned already that we have open sessions. So by visiting our website, and I'm hoping that Angela might share the link to the website or in the chat, although it will come up again later in the at the end of this presentation, and I'm sure that Elizabeth will be sharing that information as well. We run on a regular schedule these sessions for anyone who wants to sign up. There's a £5 charge for attending. If you have an organisation where you want to train a number of people, then it's possible to block book in advance rather than people paying at the time of booking. So it's just a case of emailing us. But basically that would be to attend the sort of open sessions. So that will tend to be quite a mixed bag. We will have people from, really from all the kinds of spaces that you represent, and probably quite a lot more besides. We will also run exclusive sessions online for one organisation or group of organisations with similar aims and objectives and that are collaborating. So, for example, we're about to run an online session for a community libraries group. It will only be people from community libraries there, so we can talk about those specifics in more detail rather than setting it as homework. We can do it together in discussion, and we can arrange that again by emailing us, and we can talk about how that works. It is also possible for me to come and do in-person training on occasions. It depends where it is. And it may be that the costs of that, because we have to cover the costs of travel, and my time that's involved with that. That can make it a bit prohibitive, but we are also looking to get more people around the country who can deliver this, so that there would be somebody nearer to you. Or we can do a kind of blended approach where we blend those last two, and you or somebody within your organization would gather a group of people together in a hall or a room together with a large screen. I would do the formal parts of the presentation, and then your local facilitator, if you like, will then facilitate the interactive elements, which we would arrange beforehand. And that's perhaps the best of both worlds, because it doesn't entail those extra costs of travel and so forth, but it still enables the group to get together in a room and have that interaction, which is so valuable. So those are some of the different modes of delivery, but we try to be as flexible as we possibly can. So if you have another way that you think would work for you, feel free to contact us about that. We have a number of sessions already in the diary. You access these from our Linking Lives website. People get caught out by this sometimes. The address is linkinglives.uk, not .co.uk or anything like that, but just linkinglives.uk. And if you tag on good-conversations to the end, you'll find a page which tells you more or less what I'm just telling you now, but in a briefer form. And there's a short video to go with that as well. And on that page, there is the opportunity to book. If you click on the book button, it takes you to the calendar of all the events, and then you can click on a particular event if there's one that fits with your timings, and you can make a booking at that point. So the dates that we've got coming up just now, one is the 4th of July at 10 o'clock in the morning. There's one on the 20th of July at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There's one on the 2nd of August at 10 o'clock in the morning, and one on the 24th of August at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you've got a group and you would like to set up a session, we would do it somewhere in between those at a time and date to suit you. And if the demand is sufficient, if those fill up completely, I will put extra dates in, so it's always worth checking back. So really, Liz was kind enough to give me 40 odd minutes, and I've probably only taken 20 to really get through that material. So hopefully that's saved everybody a little bit of time. That's really it.
So, David, we're going to discuss place of welcome a little bit more in a moment. But before we get that, I wonder if it might be helpful for you to share a scenario with us that people could think about. You know, you were talking about boundaries, and you share scenarios with people as to this might happen and what would you do if that happened. I wonder if it might be helpful if you could just share one of those, and then perhaps people think about that in their groups.
Okay, yes, by all means. One of the scenarios that I raised in the sessions I was talking, in the part of the session I was talking about, was one of my guests said something that made me feel uncomfortable, and I leave it as open as that. I leave it for people, if you like, to write the script for themselves as to what that might be, and I open that up for discussion. And some people will come back and say, you know, that might be they've asked a question that they don't want to answer. Another one might say it could be an inappropriate joke. Another one might say it was something that sounded as if it might be illegal. And a number of different types of scenarios will come up that people will come forward with. And then we'll discuss each one of those and talk about how you might handle it. And so the thing that typically comes out of that is that it's really important to remember that we can't tell people, we can't tell somebody else whether they're right or wrong to do what they do. And that's not our role. What we can do, and we can be completely authoritative about and as bold as we like, is we can say how we feel about it. So if something has affected us that somebody has said, it's perfectly okay to say, I'm sorry, I feel really uncomfortable with what you've just said. I would really prefer it if the conversation didn't go in that direction again. And that's a perfectly valid thing to say, as long as we're talking about how we feel and not telling them that they're a bad person. And that's really the main thrust that comes out of that one. We also talk about then, if the person persists, how we might handle that, how we might involve a colleague, and not go it alone in that type of situation, or indeed simply saying that we were uncomfortable with that and would prefer it not to be like that again, can sometimes just totally diffuse it. It's laid down a boundary, the other person knows, and they won't go there again, and it solves the problem. So that's kind of the way something like that would go. Yeah.
Thank you, David. Okay, well, what we're going to do now is I'm going to put you in breakout rooms, 4 of you be in a room. So when you get in your room, you can unmute yourself and show your face, and you can share with the other people in your little group who you are, where you're from, something positive about your place of welcome, and something that's a bit challenging perhaps about your place of welcome, and also what you'd like more support with, or what you'd like training on, or what you'd like advice about. And we'll do our best to try and see if we can provide that, or signpost you to people who could provide that, or think about what we could offer in these joint seminars that we run online from time to time. Hi, everybody. Hopefully you're all coming back now. The breakout rooms are closing. So what I thought would be good, if people are able to put in the chat some of the answers to what you were talking about. So it doesn't have to be like one person from each group. I'm easy. So if you want to just say, first of all, people want to put in the chat something positive about your place of welcome, that'd be really nice to see and encouraging to everybody. So if you thought of some positives you want to share, whether it's your own positive or what someone else said that struck you that was positive, then it'd be really nice to see that in the chat. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to put that in the chat. So if you've got something that you like to share and you think it would be encouraging to others, so it can be your own positive thing or what someone else said in your group that you thought was positive. I'll just read them out, or people can read them.
So just whilst people are doing that, I'd like to offer my congratulations to the person who found 34 squares in the diagram earlier. That was brilliant. You'll have to show me sometime.
Have you not got anyone get it right before then, David?
Usually about 10%, I would say, get it spot on.
Really? I don't think he gave us long enough to get all the
Most people miss a few, at the end of the day, we're all competitive, aren't we? We always want to try and get it right, but actually getting it right isn't all that important. It's the point that it makes that's important. So I do a different exercise in the training itself, which makes a similar point, and I give a lot more time for that. Obviously, I'm trying to keep this brief today because I know people's time is valuable, and this might be something that leads to coming to the training and gaining the benefit from that, this in itself, may not be a direct benefit in that sense. So I don't want to take too much of people's time.
We've got a few things people have commented, so I'll just read them out. Our place of welcome is about acceptance. Use of playing group games in our group works very well. We're an outdoor place of welcome, so that gives easy access to visitors. Presumably people passing see it as well. Meeting different needs. Sometimes it's just about company and conversation, and sometimes about practical support. Local primary school have come to the cafe on a couple of occasions as part of their community engagement. And I've met someone who runs a place of welcome the other week, and they told me that they had got this amazing tapestry that people had created who'd come along to the place of welcome. And it was stretching from the roof down to the ceiling, this amazing tapestry that everybody had contributed to, which was really incredible. Okay, so do you want to put maybe something that's a bit more challenging about your place of welcome, something that's a bit of a barrier or a session? Oh, here's another positive. We gave out feedback sheets and had some really positive comments, and one that stands out as a young mum saying she felt it was a safe place. That's really great to hear. So if anybody wants to share any issues, barriers, negatives, then please put them in the chat. Annika, does the recording record the chat or not? Or do we have to sort of note that down separately?
Comes as a separate text file.
What is it?
Yeah.
Has anybody got any? Right, so we've got somebody saying our location is to one side of the housing estate and it's difficult presumably to reach that. So we have to trust in publicity and word of mouth. Someone else saying that numbers are dropping, but obviously some people are struggling. Small number of guests, how do we encourage participation? So if you've got thoughts on that, then feel free to put any ideas in the chat to help and support people, because this is about mutual support and encouragement. I think as well, sometimes in nice weather, people choose to do other things outside, like going for gardening or whatever as well, and perhaps things inside aren't quite so appealing in hot weather. We find it's mainly church-based people who come. I guess sometimes word of mouth and things grow, don't they? So it takes a while sometimes for things to build up.
I think one of the things I've observed delivering this training to groups in different parts of the country is that where organisations network together, so that they're, if you like, they're all publicising each other to some extent. That can be very powerful.
In some of the areas where we have place of welcome, we have an area coordinator who can sometimes bring the local ones together. And I think that can be quite helpful for people to share what they're doing. This is a really interesting comment. We've reflected on at times the need to debrief with our volunteers, particularly, but not limited to, when there's been a very difficult character or topic in a conversation. And he says, I wonder if debriefing is part of the Linking Lives Good Conversation training offered. David, is that part of it? Do you think about debriefing volunteers?
No, we don't really talk about that.
But it's good practice, isn't it?
What I do talk about is teamwork. And I think that would probably come under teamwork, that, you know, it's really important for volunteers in these types of environments never to feel like they're going it alone on anything. And it's really important to communicate frequently and in depth. And so perhaps that's, you know, perhaps that's what Paul was thinking about when he talks about debriefing. In which case I do talk about it, but I don't call it that. I just talk about it as teamwork and frequent communication.
But sometimes I think, you know, setting aside, even if it's just 10 minutes at the end, to just come together and say, how do you feel that went today? And any issues or anything anybody wants to share can be helpful, can't it?
Yeah.
If anybody now wants to put any comments in about further support that they would find helpful going forward, like we would really like some more safeguarding training, which we have offered before. And there is some training, some resources on our Dropbox, which is open to everybody who's a registered host for a place of welcome. But if you'd like something more on that or some other topics, then feel free to put in the chat and we'll think as a team about how we could help you or where we could signpost people to. And also, if you now want to ask David some questions, then or feedback to him or ask him some things, and that would be good too. So I'm going to let you do that now in the chat. And it's almost 2 o'clock and I don't want to go on beyond too much of our time. So if you want to put things in the chat for David, he's willing to stay on and answer some questions. But obviously we understand if you have a pressing appointment and you have to leave us now. But if you have some thoughts on what you'd like to see in the future, or you've got any questions for David, then please put them in the chat. And in the meantime, I'm now going to launch a quick poll. Poll is a poll that is just a few questions for you who've attended today, and you just answer each question and it shows you the next question. It's only 4 questions long, but it will help us as a team who've planned this event today to think about, you know, what we did right, what we could do better, and so on. So we've had a question about it'd be useful to be signposted to possible sources of funding for refreshments, but appreciate this may vary with location. Yes, so we do sometimes put in the newsletter where there are local sources of funding, but on that I would say, and I'll ask David if he's got any thoughts, but your local ASDA, your local Tesco often give funding to local community groups like, you know, your scouts and your parent toddler group and so on. Just a bit of money, and that's the easiest way to get local money. You can apply to your local Tesco, your local ASDA. They have foundations. Veolia is a waste disposal unit area organization. They often have funds for local community groups depending on where you live, if you have one of their sites near you. But we'll see if we can find some more sources of funding to put in the next newsletter. But one thing you might do is approach your local voluntary sector organization. Every area has an umbrella voluntary sector group, which is called something like, ours is Bassett Law CVS, and there'll be an umbrella group which the local authority will work in partnership with, and their job is to support local voluntary organizations. And one of the things they often do is signpost people to funding, whether they do a newsletter with funding locally or whether they help you bespoke, depends on what capacity they have. But that's another way of trying to find what local funds are available. David, any thoughts from you on that question?
I'm going to pass that to Angela, actually, because as operations manager, she has more contact with coordinators of our schemes who are looking for, would be looking for funding for their projects. So I don't know if you have any ideas on that, Angela. Putting you on the spot there. You're muted, by the way.
Yeah, I think there is lots of like small pots of money about. I think what we find is it tends to be very local, kind of localized. So community foundations, like local or area community foundations tend to be really supportive of local initiatives that are particularly grassroots and looking to empower people. So yeah, I don't want to teach grandma how to suck eggs because I'm sure there's lots of people here that know about those. But yeah, they've found that they're quite useful. The lottery fund, the one that's up to £10,000, I know that some of our befriending schemes have managed to find funding from them, again, because it's very local and grassroots, and that's what the lottery are about. Not sure about any others that are kind of generic. But yeah, community foundations can be a very helpful source of funding information as well as actually providing funding.
There's also Magic Little Grants, which has come from the postcode lottery, I think it is. That's referred to in our newsletter. That's a very quick turnaround for a small pot of money that you can apply for. Or Google Magic Little Grants.
Yeah. I guess a Google search of local grant funding would produce something, as long as you've given Google permission to know where you are.
But again, as I say, your local voluntary service umbrella organization ought to be able to help you as well. I think I can't see any questions for you, David, particularly. Hopefully people will follow it up with the website and the training that you offer, which is a very, very good value at £5 a person for, is it 2 hours long that you do? 3 hours long?
Yep, 2 hours.
Yep. So I think it's really, really good value. And I hope people will sign up for it. If you've got any more thoughts on Place of Welcome, then do get in touch with us at info@placeofwelcome.org.uk. And it's been lovely to see you all, and thanks for all that you're doing with Place of Welcome. And we'll sign off now, and goodbye to everyone, and have a lovely afternoon. Thank you. Bye.